Hi everyone. Hey, so welcome to my talk at JSworld conference. I'm excited to even be here. This is I think this is my second time at the JSworld conference. I think it was okay. No, I think the first was at VJS Amsterdam. That conference was amazing. The organizers are top notch. So thank you, organizers. If this was a physical conference, I would have said like let's just give a round of applause to the organizers. They are so awesome, and I'm excited to be at this conference. So I'm gonna be speaking about design from the realm of open source. So yeah, just sit back and in your computers, probably with coffee or juice or something, and let's get to this talk. So a friend of mine, Adewale Abati, would say open source is the new source, like source and open source. So yeah, design for the realm of open source. Let's get into it. So I do open source. I have a couple of open source projects on GitHub that you can check. You can take a look at, like React Notify. My website's open source and other projects. So I love open source. I've been contributing to open source projects for a while now, and I'm excited about open source because this is how we get discovered. This is how people get to find us and what we've done in the past and what we are still doing is via GitHub and open source. So I work with Stack Overflow as a developer relations manager, working between the community management and product platform engineering at Stack Overflow. So I also manage a couple of communities around Africa, like on Stack Africa, Africa Hacks, Developer Circles Lagos on Facebook, react.js Lagos, and Open Source Community Africa. So yeah, this is based on like what I do. So let's get into that good stuff. Let's get cooking. I think that's it. So designers cannot get less creative. The more you produce design assets, the more creative you get over time. That's how design works. So the more you create is that's how literally everything works. The more you create design assets over time. If I keep on practicing, keep on like producing design assets, keep on like basically just designing in general, I become creative over time. So when you tell me, hey, design this that works this way, prototype it this way, I should understand how it works and I should be able to like prototype from start to finish. Since like literally I'm creative already because I've been producing design assets over time. So designers don't get less creative; they become more creative actually by creating design assets over time. So that's basically experience. So what exactly is the problem with design and open source, designers and open source? What is the problem and how do we tackle the problem? So before we can say, hey, this is a solution to a problem, we must firstly understand what exactly the problem is. And that's what I'm going to start with. So let's move forward. Starting out with contributing to open source as a designer can be so much intimidating and confusing based on the level of features you see already prepared with little or no documentation for designers. So when we are developing projects, there's always documentation for developers on how developers can get started. Say, hey, as a developer, the first thing we do is we go straight to the documentation to see how to install this. Okay, as usual, the first thing is to clone the repo locally and install dependencies and any other thing we need to set up in our env file or whichever other setup we have to do. So we go straight to documentation, but the documentation is always for developers. There is no documentation for designers. So anytime designers pop up on projects like this, they don't understand what to do. They are confused because there is no documentation for designers. And this is one major problem that designers are facing when they try to contribute to open source. And this is what we have to solve. This is what we have to solve. We need to start creating documentation for designers. So this is basically just one of the problems. Let's go to the next problem. So the next problem is that the ideology of designers are not needed in open source, but just make it work. I've heard a lot of people say statements like this, and I feel it's wrong, and I do not stand with this statement that says the ideology basically design is just an ideology, and like it's not needed in open source. Like just make it work. Just make sure that this project is working. Whatever project I'm building, it must just work. I don't care if it's beautiful. I don't care if the UX flow is good. All I care about is when I click this, it must do exactly as I say. When I click this, this must happen. When I click on login, it must redirect me to a dashboard. All of this, but I don't care if it's beautiful or not. I don't care if the design is top notch. I those they do not really matter. And this is something a lot of people say. And this is also one of the problems of why designers find it hard to contribute open source because the community of open source is not so much welcoming to designers because of ideologies and ideas like this that people say. So let's get into the solution. We've spoken about the problem. With two major problem. This is those two major things. These are basically my problems are going to be based around those two things. And my solutions are also going to be based around those two things. So yeah, let's talk about the solution and the next slide. The first solution we're looking at here is resources. So we need resources as designers. Designers need resources that are tailored towards how to contribute to open source as a designer. This is so much needed. So much needed. We spoke about having documentations for developers that once developers hop on your project on GitHub, the first thing they go to is let's understand first things first. What do we install? How do we install? What dependencies needs to be installed? What keys need to be gotten from somewhere to make our API work perfectly when I clone the repo locally? What needs to be set up for this project to run perfectly locally? All of those things are being defined in the documentation of this open source project on GitHub for developers. But now we're talking to us towards designers. We need similar resources, similar documentation for designers available in the documentation of this open source project. We'll have the section for developers. We will also have that little section, that section in the documentation for designers, where there will be resources and documentation towards how a designer contributes to these projects, to this open source project rather. So thanks to organizations like the Open Source Design, Open Source Initiative, and other organizations trying to create design related content, helping designers contribute to open source. So they are creating content, videos, articles, doing talks like the one I'm doing right now on how designers can contribute open source easily. So yeah, thanks to these organizations, and we're looking forward to having more resources online, more videos, more articles about how designers can contribute open source efficiently. So the next thing, yes, I also spoke about this while I was talking about in my last slide, which is about conferences and creating videos, like what I'm doing right now. You could easily like do a talk like this at a conference, apply it for CFP, submit to talk about how to contribute open source as a designer if you've done this as a designer before. So we need conference talks that are tailored towards designers contributing to open source on a large scale, like basically what is happening right now. This is a talk at JSworld conference about how designers can get into open source and start contributing. It's super important that talks like this and conferences like this happen so that informations, knowledge like this can be passed across. And once it's passed across, so knowledge can be recycled. So as I'm sharing something like this at a conference, you can just pick what I'm saying, just go redo a section of it in another little conference or a meetup or somewhere, and just like take the knowledge to the ends of the earth. Just take it out there, share that, hey, you can contribute results too as a designer, and here is how. So the next thing is we have tools out there, we have developers, we have companies out there building tools that help developers contribute to open source, that help make the flow of being a developer super easy. We have developers and companies building these tools and putting them out there. But now we need tools, we need these developers and these companies to also build tools that will be tailored towards designers contributing to open source. This is what we need also. We need developers and companies to be able to come together and build tools that say, hey, we are building this tool to enable designers contribute to open source efficiently. So this is one of the things that designers are lacking. The tools that are not available. The tools are not available to enable designers contribute to open source. If these tools are available, designers definitely, if it's going to make the contributor open source as a designer simple, designers would definitely use this. They would definitely use this. So we need to create tools. Developers and companies need to develop more tools that will enable designers contribute to open source. Designers need to understand how to communicate with developers, and developers also have to understand how to communicate with designers. So this is one of the most important parts. I've gotten this question a couple of times over Twitter, and people say, hey, what exactly makes me a senior developer? What makes me a mid-level developer? What makes me an associate developer or junior developer? What exactly makes me this? And I think I'm going to address this from the senior developer perspective. So there are many things, not just coding, not just experience, that makes me a senior engineer. What makes me a senior engineer or senior developer is number one, engineering skill. Number two, having soft skills. Soft skills are too important of being a senior engineer because this is one of them. Being able to communicate with designers and being able to communicate with fellow developers. Communication between designers and developers is super important if you are looking to, hey, I want to become a senior engineer or I want to work in the role as a senior engineer. It's too important. So designers need to understand how to communicate with developers, and developers need to understand how to communicate with designers. It's too important. And yeah, this is one thing that we need to look at. So let's talk about getting started with open source software. First things off, we're going to define what open source is. So this is my definition of open source, and so this is what open source is to me. And yeah, so open source in a nutshell is a free software built by the community for the community with improvements shared across different technical talents in a community. So open source in a nutshell is a free software built by the community firstly, and is built for the community with improvements to this project shared across different technical talents in a community. That's what open source is here for me. The web app in open source is view page source. I'm sure we all know what view page source is. So the web app is open source for years, thanks to view page source, thanks to Chrome and all the web browsers out there for releasing view page source. So by just like if it's on a Windows laptop, just right click, you get to see view page source, and you can get to see things like the HTML of the web page. You can get to see what makes what happens. So how can designers begin contributing also? So we've spoken about the problems, we've spoken about tools, we've spoken about resources, we've spoken about view page source, we've spoken about what open source is, we've spoken about designers communicating with developers and developers communicating with designers. We've spoken about all of this. So now we are getting to the point of how can designers actually contribute to open source. So it's not as like this GIF you're seeing here that looks like hardcore mathematics or physics. It's nothing like that. So it's pretty simple. The best place to start out is the GitHub Issues tab. This is the first place to start out, the GitHub Issues tab. So first things first, we evaluate a chosen project's workflow. This is the first thing, the user experience, the color combination of and every component that's available on the website or in a project. So we pick a project, we evaluate the workflow. How is it when from the workflow means from me launching get basically the website loading, the web page loading, and me going to the point of having a dashboard or a preview where I can get to see basically how just use the website, log in, sign up, click on my account settings, profile settings, changing my profile picture, all of these things. So we evaluate all of this flow. So after doing our evaluation of these projects, we can move forward to like say, hey, this is the kind of contributions I want to make to this project. So never start a feature without consulting one of the project authors if it's a valid addition to the project or how exactly your idea can be improved. Because we submit pull requests to projects and it doesn't get merged. It can be by many reasons. Probably this feature is not needed right now with this project, but because of the fact that you never asked, it was never added, and you feel like, hey, I feel I'm not being welcomed in open source space because all my pull requests just gets closed, and this is how I feel. Because you don't contact the owners of the project, the maintenance of the project, say, hey, I want to open up this feature, and I'm not sure, is it a great addition? Is it something you want to have right now? Then they tell you, hey, let's make this happen. Thank you for this addition. Or they tell you, hey, we're not sure we want to have this right now, but when we change our mind, we'll definitely let you know. So yeah, never start a feature without consulting the project authors or maintainers if it's a valid addition to the project or how exactly your idea can be improved. Coming up with alternative design patterns by raising an issue in relation to why, how, and timeline is super important. So, for example, the experience of the product that you want to contribute to, when they click on login, probably let's say it takes them to another page that says, okay, let's say for on the first page. So let's build a virtual. Let's just have this in your mind. I have a website. I'm on my login page right now. On the first page, all I see is username. Then I type in my username. Then I click on next. It tells me type password. So I type in my password. Then it says click on next again. It says confirm your password. And I confirm my password. And I click on login again. That makes no sense. That literally makes no sense. So that makes no sense. And you might probably see like a project that has this kind of workflow. Then when you see that this is the workflow the product has already, so you come up with alternative design patterns on how this can be improved. So you say, hey, I think the email can be on the first page. The password can also be on the first page. And I think we should also scrap confirm password for logging in because that literally makes no sense. So you put up the say, hey, let's just put on the first page login your email and your password. Then just click on submit. Then takes you to your login page. Rather takes you to your dashboard or to your basically where you want to be. It redirects you to where you want to be. Most likely a dashboard or a feed or something, depending on what the feature of the website is like. So just basically developing alternative design patterns and raising an issue first. So you don't go ahead to create a pull request and say, hey, this is my addition. No, you go straight to or go and start rather designing something without even you consulting the maintainers first. So raise an issue first on alternative design patterns on how exactly it can be improved. First thing first. So the next step is, if you really want to go, you want to go all the way. You want to go all the way. You want to, this is a long shot, or you want to go all the way. You can prototype your design properly. If you're contributing on OS projects where they care less about design, if you want to convince them on how, say, hey, I really want to contribute to this project and I want to go all the way, you can design what you feel it should look like, and you can even go the extra mile of prototyping and sharing a prototype. So thanks to Adobe, Adobe XD, you can also, so once you, so Sketch also does this, and Figma also, but I'm using the case study of Adobe XD. So on Adobe XD, once you've designed, you've prototyped, you can also share. So share means you generating a unique link, a unique URL, where you can also share that URL to anyone. Then they can get to use the project as like as if it's a developed project. They can click buttons and it does things. So you design, then you prototype, then you share the link of what the prototype is going to look like to the maintainer. Say, hey, I feel okay. Just take a look at this. I think this. I think this makes sense. So you share the link to them. They use the product like, hey, I think this makes sense. Share us the file, and they can give it to their front end engineer, and they can start implementing. You just contribute open source. But then that's a long shot. That's a long shot. But then if you really want to be deliberate, this is something you can definitely do. So yeah, so let's talk about some crappy things some engineers say about design. So let's get into it. So I've heard a lot of people say things like design is an ideology and not a professional profession. This makes no sense and should never be said about anybody's job. This is wrong. So design is not an ideology, and design is a professional profession, and it's something that they hire and pay people for. Yeah. If the end product is quality software, why can't designers code? Yeah, so designers must know how to code, but designers must know how to communicate with developers based on what you're designing. This is important, but it's not necessary that designers know how to code. It's not important, but they must understand how to communicate with designers. So if the end product is quality software, why can't designers code? This is one of the shitty things that a lot of people say about designers, and it's very wrong, and we shouldn't even say this. So yeah, let's move forward. Design is one of the most significant departments while building a startup product or working in an open source project. So you should never like outweigh the importance of design. It's too important. I can literally like prefer a project that is limited in many ways, but then the use case using it is the flow is super fast. It's super like straightforward. It's simple. I would prefer that to a really complicated product with bad user experience, because it's beautiful, it's amazing, it's fast. I love the flow, but then it's a bit limited. I would prefer that because it doesn't give me stress. That so design should never be like taken out on any open source products or in a startup. It's too important. So again, the web has been open source again for designers to contribute using the web inspector. So if we look right here, we see something like inspect after view page source. So which grants you access to live debugging design in CSS. So as a designer, if you understand CSS, you can always inspect elements and see what CSS element is causing what to happen. Let's say a hover effect in CSS. You want to see how it's working, how basically it was designed. You can go to inspect elements and see how exactly it was implemented, and you can know what to do basically. So version control design history. So if we think about Adobe Photoshop, for those who have done like designs on Adobe Photoshop, they have something called design history. So it's more like gigs for designers. So being able to push between design tools with ease. So one thing we need is something like version control, like design history, something like gigs for designers. So if we're gonna have something like this, probably like a plugin, this would make sense on how we can be able to push design assets as SVGs from our product design tools like XD, Sketch, or Figma to GitHub as SVGs, and also importing them back into our design tools as design assets as usual. So this is like an example of a tool that we could build and we could use as designers. This is also really important, and I think developers and companies can take a look at this idea and see what they can bring out of it. So the next step is designing for multiple devices, like responsiveness, if you really want to convince them. As I said before, going the extra mile is one thing that we do as people who want to contribute open source as a designer or as a developer. You can go the extra mile by prototyping your design, sharing a URL. You can go the extra mile of designing like for different screens, for the iPad, for iOS device, for Android, just basically mobile device, iPad, and the system, so they can get to see how it looks. Because this is really important when you really want to go the extra mile to convince the people you are presenting to say, hey, I believe that this improvement should be made because I can see this is how valid it is, and I can really convince them if I have a working prototype that they could use. Start writing documentation for other designers to see and follow along. Is a trend that someone has to start, and someone did not start this because they believe someone else would. At the end, no one ends up starting until probably a couple of years later, or again, probably one eternity later. So always start something. It's so most times we say, hey, I think I'll probably start this later, or probably someone else will. Then nobody ends up starting until probably like 100 or an eternity later. Then no one ends up starting, and it just goes like that. So yeah, start something today. Start writing documentation for designers. It's important, and I believe it's super useful. So here are some tools that designers can use when trying to design and prototype. So for design, we have Figma, we have Adobe XD, we have Sketch. For prototyping, we have InVision Studio, Adobe XD, we have Ognim Studio, we have Sketch, we have Webflow, we have Framer, we have Zeppelin, and we have Flowmap. For discussions and collaborations as designers, we have Zeppelin, we have Slack. There's a Zeppelin extension, Zeppelin plugin rather for Slack. So when changes are made or updates are made to your Zeppelin dashboard, you get updates on Slack. There's also Figma, and there's InVision for design. That's for discussions and collaborations for designers. So resources were not openly distributed as it was today. This is the truth. This is how it is. But today we have people writing articles, creating video content, running workshops, conference talks, like what's happening exactly right now. We have people writing research articles and lots more. Today is the best time to start contributing to open source as a designer, and I believe you should not start tomorrow. You should start right now. You should go to your favorite projects on GitHub, look at the flow, and see how you can contribute. Open an issue, discuss with the maintainers, and thanks to GitHub for creating the discussions tab. Open a discussion, ask questions, and speak with the maintainers of this project and see how you can improve it as a designer. So this is super important, and I think we should not start contributing open source as designers tomorrow. We should start now. You should go to GitHub, find that project, create an issue, open a discussion, ask questions on how you can get started, start designing, start prototyping for different devices, and put it out there. So here are some resources you can take a look at. So we have open source .org, open source design.net, open source community Africa. It's for us. We have open source as Facebook, open source at Google, open source at Microsoft, and open source at Twitter. They have a bunch of open source projects you can take a look at, and you can just basically read up on. So yeah, thank you for coming to this conference. I'm excited to really have you here. If you have any questions, ask. I'm going to be around. You can also ask and follow me on Twitter at developer AO. So that's developer AYO on Twitter and GitHub. So yeah, thank you. And yeah, if you have any questions again, I'm around. So bye.